Hey everybody, and welcome to this video. I think this is episode 5 of me talking about my new PC. For those that haven't tuned in, or those that have forgotten what this series is about, it's about building a new PC. So the PC that I currently have at home is about 5 years old, and it's getting to the kind of end of life in terms of, things are a bit slow, the disk space is running out, and it's just not really fit for purpose anymore. I'm constantly having to maintain it in terms of freeing up that disk space and being conscious of that. And sometimes it freezes, it can't handle the workload that I'm doing. So I've invested in a new PC. I spent a wee while speccing it up, and I ultimately want this new PC to be able to do video rendering, help with that workload, and just be a general PC. My husband does game on it a little bit, but not massively. We're not massive gamers on the PC. I tend to game on the PS4, and like I said, he does some gaming, but not a lot. So this new PC is a general purpose, video editing machine, and a little bit of gaming. So in this episode, I want to talk about the build and putting that PC and all the components that I bought together. So let's dive in. So I made sure I laid out everything on my kitchen table. I wanted the space and the room in order to actually build all this. So I got all the parts together, and I made sure that I had the relevant screwdrivers that I needed in order to do this. I also had my laptop set up just in case I needed to refer to any instructions or any other tutorials in order to figure out how some of these components actually piece together. So that was the first stage, and I think that's really important to gather all of that and to gather where you are working and make that easy, and this process easy for yourself. So the first step was actually to take the case fans that I'd bought and actually fit them into the case. When I looked at the case, the fan that was already in there from the manufacturer was actually set to be an intake fan. Now, it was fitted at the back of the case, and I wanted that to be the exhaust fan. So as you can see, I fitted my two 120mm fans on the front of the case as intake fans, and I changed around the back fan to be an exhaust fan. Now, there's still some room in this case for extra fans, so I'm going to get another 120mm fan for the front of the case, where you can see there's an empty slot. I'm going to replace the one that the case came with because it's not controlled by the motherboard, so it runs at 100% all the time, and what I want to be able to do is control the kind of workload that each of these fans are doing. I'm also going to get a 140mm fan for the top and make that an exhaust, so that I've got 3 fans at the front doing intake and then 2 at the back doing out or exhaust of the air, to try and keep this case as cool as possible. So the next step was to actually get the motherboard out and start to install the different components on that outside the case. So like every PC builder does, I got the box from the motherboard and put the motherboard on top of that to try and keep it as safe as possible. The first component to go in was the CPU, and that's always a nerve-wracking bit. I always double check that I'm putting the CPU into the right bit. So using the guide triangle that's on the CPU and then on the motherboard and putting it in. Fairly straightforward to do. The fan that came with the AMD processor, the Wraith I think it's called, was actually quite tricky to fit. It's got little levers that push down and then click into the kind of bracing plate that are fitted to the motherboard. And it's a great system, but it just requires a little bit of force, and it can be a bit scary trying to force that in. But it's a satisfying click when it actually does go in. I also fitted the memory as well. I was quite surprised at how heavy the memory was when I took them out the box and put them into the motherboard. But I'm guessing that's just the type of memory they are, both with the RGB lights in them and the kind of cooling mechanism that they've got in terms of doing that. So yeah, that's 2 16 gig slots of memory that are in there as well. I also fitted the M2 drive into the motherboard as well. I was really surprised at how small that was. It's the first time I've ever done an M2 drive, first time I've ever actually seen one as well, and I was surprised at how small they were and how easy that was just to fit. It just clips into the motherboard, I put the shield back on, and yeah, one screw keeps it in. Fairly straightforward and fairly simple. I'd got the basic components all plugged in, so I had the motherboard all plugged in and wired up. I had the CPU fan, memory, and the storage for the operating system drive, and I just decided to fire up the PC. And this is where I hit my first snag, my first troubleshooting issue, and came a bit unstuck. So I plugged everything in, plugged the monitor, plugged the keyboard in, and fired it up, and everything powered on. All the lights came on, everything was looking good, but I was getting no display on the screen. And when I had a look at the motherboard, there's a little debug console on it, and it's got 4 lights, and the light that was flashing was the CPU, which wasn't great. So switched everything off, turned it back on just in case it was one of those, and I had the same CPU light come on. Now this is something that I talked about, I think, in my video before and during my research of this motherboard. So when this motherboard that I've got, the MSI B450 Gaming Pro Carbon AC, didn't support the AMD Ryzen 3000 series, and eventually a BIOS update came out to support it, and I was hoping that because there was a sticker on my box, so it looked like it'd come up afterwards, that the BIOS would be up to date and would be done for me, and I wouldn't have to do that. Unfortunately, I don't think it had been done. I've got no way of really testing that or seeing that because I wasn't getting a display on my screen, so I couldn't tell what version of BIOS it was. So what I did was go onto the MSI website, download the BIOS. There's instructions on how to flash your USB, or install the flash BIOS on your USB. Carried that out. That motherboard that I've got is actually quite handy. So there's a USB port at the back of the motherboard, and there's a little switch or a little button. So you power on the PC, have that USB and the dedicated USB flash port, and press the little button, and what happens is inside the motherboard there's a light that flashes and it updates the BIOS. Now I don't know whether, and it looked like it successfully done that, and once it completed I tried that reboot again. What happened then was that got a red light on the debug console for the VGA, so it wasn't detecting any graphics. Now this is where I became really frustrated and annoyed and this might be something that the transition from my Intel, which is what I usually use for my processors, to AMD kind of caught me out on. So the AMD processor that I have has no integrated graphics. So plugging in the USB cable into my motherboard and expecting to get some kind of display out was never ever going to work because I don't have integrated graphics in that processor. I have an integrated graphics processor in my Intel processor in my old PC, so I can do that, but I can't do that in this AMD, and that really frustrated me, and I lost a lot of time trying to troubleshoot that, taking all the components apart off the motherboard, replugging them in, redouble checking the manual, making sure I hadn't missed something obvious, until I went and read about if the integrated graphics wasn't working on my processor, and that's when I found I didn't have integrated graphics. So that's when I went to go and strip out the graphics card of my old PC and put it in the new one. I think because I'd been so frustrated and wasn't paying full attention to it, when I plugged in that graphics card I still got that VGA light, and that's when I decided that I'd had enough. I needed to have a break. I was getting hungry and I needed to stop. And I went away for an hour or two and watched some Netflix series. And when I came back down and had a look at it, I realised I hadn't plugged in all the power into my graphics card. Although I'd got lights on the graphics card, I hadn't plugged in enough of the power supply to actually make it operational. So once I did that and realised my mistake, everything fired up and I go into the BIOS of my system. So yeah, lesson learned. Maybe read the manuals a bit and maybe pay a bit more attention. And it's like anything else that I've ever done in IT. Sometimes a little break can actually give you more perspective and more views around being able to actually fix that, because I've lost count how many times I've struggled with a problem at work all day, maybe went for a run or went shopping or just went home and watched TV, and then the solution has actually come to me later on really easily, and I'm like, well, of course, that's the answer. So it's a little lesson learned, and something I think we all probably need to pay a bit more attention around and not put too much stress on ourselves. So fitting everything was fairly straightforward in terms of getting it in the case. The cable management kind of worked well. What I didn't love was the fact that, yes, there is this great little cage for the PSU, but it is actually quite a tight space. When you put that PSU in and try and do the cable management, you end up with the cables either not quite in the right place and then not being able to put the case back on, a case side back door back on, or you're worrying about catching the cables when you're doing that as well. Now, this could be entirely my fault. I might not be doing it right, but I found it quite cumbersome to get the PSU in and the cables and deal with all of that as well. It's probably why I've never actually done cable management properly, because I'm not the type of person that likes to fiddle with that, and I'm always worried I'm going to snatch a cable or cut it or do something wrong. So yeah, that's something that I didn't enjoy, but I get why the cage part or the case part of that is inside that case for the PSU to try and keep it tight. But yeah, that it is what it is. I also found it quite hard to put the cables for the case. So, your power cables, your, USB cables and stuff like that on the motherboard, because those bits on my motherboard are right at the edge of where the edge of the PSU housing is. So it's quite a tight fit, and I've got small hands, and even for me, I struggled as well. So that's something that I did struggle with as well. So now that was in the BIOS, the next step was to actually install the operating system. So I went away and made a bootable USB for Windows 10. And I think some point last week we released the 2004 version of Windows 10. So I downloaded that. So it's the latest version of Windows 10 that's on that new PC. I timed it, and from that bootable Windows 10 screen saying, install the operating system, to me actually getting to log into Windows was 10 minutes. I think it was just over 10 minutes. And I think that's actually a quite decent boot time. Now, the bottleneck probably was that USB that I used. I don't think it's 3.0 compatible, so I think it's only a USB 2. So it's probably a wee bit slower in that terms. But I think 10 minutes to get the operating system up is actually quite good. But yeah, that's kind of the build. I had hoped to try and film it, but it was just a bit too problematic trying to get the right angle and get the right view and build my PC without doing anything wrong and contaminating the build and stuff like that. So hopefully the footage and my dialogue is quite good. My next step and what I want to do is benchmark the PC. So I've got the operating system installed, and I've got some of the software that I want installed, like Office and Edge. What I want to install is check there's any updates. I doubt there's any updates at this stage, given that the version of Windows is just out, but I want to make sure the drivers are all up to date before I benchmark it. I want to double check the BIOS, change any settings in there, and tweak that. But I'll do a video on that and what I'm tweaking and what I need to do in terms of that, and I'll talk about benchmarking it, and I'll talk about how much better, hopefully, fingers crossed, it is in terms of video editing and rendering as well, and just general. So there's a few more videos in this story. Hopefully you're enjoying it. If you've got any questions, please do reach out to me. Any feedback, please do reach out to me, and as always, remember to like, subscribe and ring that little bell so that you get notifications for when I release another video. Take care everybody, see you soon.